أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين. Let's get started. This is a picture of a book. I just have a picture of it and I put a source there. So I don't want you to necessarily go through and like find this book and like look at the book. My objective was only that picture specifically, right? Now I want you to imagine this, that this is a capital T truth. Okay, so this is how reality works. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed everything. This is the maze of life, right? The entire thing. And navigating it, there's a way to do it. There is one path that you can take, right? We always make dua, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. And as-sirat over here it's a single path, right? When we talk about guidance, for example, it's the same thing. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِتُخْرِجَ النَّاسَ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ, right? Dhulumat is in the plural sense. Dhulumat, dhulm and dhulumat. So, single and plural. In this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions an-nur. An-nur is alif lam in the beginning, which is the. Like, this is specifying. It's like saying that this is the only one. You know how we say alhamdulillah, right? We're specifying, we're making it like single, right? So, when it comes to guidance, there's only one guidance. But when it comes to being in the dark, so to speak, right? Being lost, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions it in the plural sense over here. When he says, for example, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ, right? Khusr is also used in the indefinite sense. It's not definite, right? It's like perpetual loss. You're completely immersed in loss and stuff, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that if you hold on to the guidance Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent, then you're going to be good to go. Because that one way towards the end, if you follow that, you're going to get out of this maze. But if you don't follow it, you're going to be stuck in those walls and you're going to keep hitting these bumps and roadblocks and so on. And you're going to keep getting frustrated because you want those walls to change, but they don't change for you. The system is already set in place. So, وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَحْوِيلًا, that you're not going to find changes in the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decided something has to go a certain way, it's going to go a certain way and you're not going to change that. Right? You don't get to decide what happens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already decided that in the past, knowing what everyone is going to do in the future, right? He designed everything, he mapped out everything based on what he knew everyone's going to do and based on what he knew is best and so on. All his knowledge and his wisdom, he designed everything based on that, right? And so that's already set in place. I don't change with how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed everything. It's set. So I can take that path that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told me about. Here, take this, go with it, get out of this maze, and you're going to be good to go, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَإِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُم مِّنِّي هُدًى فَمَن تَبِعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. That when he was sending Adam alayhi salam, that whenever he told him that whenever guidance is going to come to you from me, then whoever follows it is not going to have any stress or worries or anything like that. وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ, there's going to be no fear on them, and وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, and there's going to be no stress. So you're going to be living a happy life in this world, but you're also going to be living you're also going to have a good end at the end, inshallah, right? So imagine this: when you die, because you follow this pathway out of whatever it was, the life that you were going through, at the end of it, you're going to be successful. You're going to be happy. You're going to be good in the grave. You're going to be good in the hereafter, and you're set, right? But if you choose not to do that, you're going to have perpetual loss, rage, and stress, and all those things, right? And you don't want to do that. You don't want to live that life. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over here is giving you this understanding over here. Everything you need to know, here's the guidance. Follow it, you're going to get out of the maze. Don't follow it, you're going to be stuck in this maze, and there's many different ways not to follow that path, right? Many different ways. So it's important to understand that there's many ways not to do things right, but there is one way to do it right. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. That hold the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala together and don't differentiate, don't divide into groups and factions and whatever and stuff. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you to hold on to that single guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent you. That is the one way to get out. There is no other way to get out of this, right? So when we don't accept that reality, that's when problems happen. Now I'm giving you a lot of this theoretical stuff, but let's go also now into our perspective of this. Now you're standing in front of the maze. I don't know why it's not showing the source, but there is a source to this, and it's not my thing. So I don't know why it's not showing that link. But anyways, this is you standing over here. From your perspective, it's a bunch of walls. and you don't know how to get out. You're standing, this is your life, this is you without guidance. How am I going to get out of this? How am I going to go in and get out of this? I don't know the layout, I don't know the blueprint, I don't know any of this stuff. How am I going to get out of this? How am I going to navigate? How long is it going to take me to get out? This is the stress that you're feeling, right? A lot of times we feel this stress when it comes to wealth and property and risk, like, everything that Allah has given and so on. We worry about that because we're worried about what's going to happen tomorrow. What's going to happen to my kids? What's going to happen to my, overall family? What's going to happen to my life? What's going to happen? Whatever. You worry about all these things, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, the Prophet said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Hadith Qudsi, it's an ayah, تَفَرَّغْ لِعِبَادَتِي أَمْلَأُ صَدْرَكَ الْغِنَى. Immerse yourself in my ibadah, and I'm going to take care, I'm going to fill your heart with richness, with satisfaction and so on. وَأَسُدَّ فَقْرًا. And I will address your poverty. I'll take care of your poverty. You're not going to be poor and so on, right? And even if you are, that's not going to be like something that you're going to be overstressed about, because Allah is going to make things work out. You're going to have barakah in your life and so on. So you're not going to feel like somebody's going to give you a gift and you'll be like, oh, this is good. Another day, something else is going to happen and stuff. So you're going to get, instead of necessarily getting like, for example, $1 million, you might get, for example, somebody bringing you food today, so you don't have to buy food. Somebody, and this is just like, people just like bring it because, like, for whatever reason. Maybe you're going somewhere and somebody's like, hey, you know what, like, come eat with me or whatever and stuff. So you have your next meal there. This is how things kind of work out. And then he says, and if you don't do that, your hearts are going to be filled with preoccupation with things. You're going to be concerned about everything, like, how am I going to take care of this? What's going to happen? What about this? What about this? What about that? And stuff, your family, your kids, whatever. That's what you're going to be worried about. What am I supposed to feel? And I'm not going to take care of your poverty. So this is you standing over here, looking at life. How in the world am I going to get through this? How are my kids going to grow up and stuff? How am I, what am I going to do? If you're not married, how is my marriage going to work out? If it's going to, who am I going to meet and stuff like that? Or what am I going to do? Or like, are things going to work out in the marriage and stuff? How many kids are we going to have? And what is going to happen to our kids and stuff? But in the future, when things are, right now, immorality is everywhere, right? And the moral code is deteriorating essentially because, there is no standard, strict moral code that people follow nowadays. It's like this relative morality, right? So everything changes by the times and stuff like that. Today something is okay, tomorrow it's going to be not okay. It's something that's not okay today, tomorrow it's going to be okay. It just kind of changes like that, right? So, and it's going to keep changing like that as long as people sort of just go by whatever they want to do and not what the standard that they all adopt. Now, you're standing over here, you're worried about all these potential problems, right? What's going to happen if this doesn't happen right now? Maybe you're organizing an event, and you're like, if I don't do this right now, what's going to happen? What's going to happen if I don't do this right now, right? Or what's going to happen if this other person doesn't do this and that stuff right now, right? And you're so concerned, and so you're overwhelmed. And this is you standing there with all these, things preoccupying your mind. And you're concerned about all these things, right? So that's that. What do? You follow the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he tells us that, and last time we mentioned the hadith of the angel, coming in and setting down for you your life, your provision, and everything like that when you're in the womb, right? This is something where now you're born. Everything has already been mapped out for you. And the Prophet ﷺ also tells you, and here he's telling you that everyone is born in the Islamic fitrah, right? And the fitrah over here, it's like you have this natural predisposition to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to follow His guidance. Because before you were born, before we were all born, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked us, He took a pledge from us, right? And we might not remember and stuff, but this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about. And He said, Alastu bi rabbikum? Am I not your Lord? And we said, Bala, you are, of course you are, right? And this is in the conditions where it's like we're supposed to obey Him and we're supposed to follow Him and so we had this whole thing happen before we were born in this world. Then we were born in this world, right? Meaning our souls were breathed into our the bodies, right? Like in our mother's wombs, and so then we were in this world, and then from this, when the soul is taken out, then we go to the next world and so on. So in a sense, from the time that we were created, our souls were created until the day of judgment, we don't really like disappear. We don't become like non-existent. So all it is before we were there, souls will be breathed into our bodies, and then they're going to be taken out of our bodies, and then after that, when we're put in the graves or whatever, then they're going to be put back in the bodies. There's a side question that I don't want to get into because this is not the topic today, which is what happens if a person gets eaten up by animals and stuff, or they get burnt and stuff, that the soul returns to the body and stuff. That is a separate topic, and the scholars have definitely gone into details about all this stuff. But my point over here is just understanding that this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sort of pre-programmed us to submit to his guidance. When we see the guidance, our natural disposition is to recognize the guidance and accept it. But then sometimes things get tainted, or we get conflicts, right? So imagine if you have, when you turn on your computer and your Windows just kind of got messed up. So you see that black screen, right? Or you see the screen that just says like whatever it's not Windows, but like whatever computer that you have. For example, if you have Lenovo, then like a Lenovo thing is going to come up and stuff before Windows starts loading, right? It's the BIOS or whatever, in the beginning. That's what it is, right? So imagine your computer being kind of like that, where it knows, okay, I'm supposed to do something, but I'm ready for guidance. I need that guidance, right? So you install Windows by, having like a USB or wherever your Windows software is, right? And then you upload it or you connect it to the computer, and the computer recognizes that guidance and it starts downloading the information on it. So now it knows how to function and so on. This is how it's supposed to be. It has certain sort of initial disposition. It starts doing certain things a certain way, and that's it. By itself, it knows it needs to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Its heart, the person's heart is connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, period, right? But the environment, the parents and stuff come in and they impact the person and they change that, right? So your worldview starts changing in a certain way. Your tendencies start kind of sort of reflecting the environment that you're raised up in and so on. So that's something that understanding over here is going to help. That our environment can corrupt us. So for example, if you had a virus come to you, that virus is going to mess up your computer, for example, and you're not going to be able to do the things that you're sort of used to doing. If you wanted to move the mouse a certain place, it might not be able to move it because the virus is sort of like preventing the normal functioning of the computer, right? So the fitra gets impacted because the environment can become toxic to it. It becomes like a virus to it. Okay, so understand that it's going to be something that that can benefit us. Just accepting this, moving forward with it, and that's that. Okay. Now notice over here at the end that Allah said, "Allahu a'lamu bima kanu amilin." That Allah knows best what they would have done, right? And that means that if a person dies, for example, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows how that person what that person would have done in the future had they been alive. But that also tells us that He also knows what we're gonna do. The fact that we're living, He already knew that whatever we're gonna do. Not only does He know what the person would have done if they were alive, and this is less of something that's like from our perspective, it's less of a reality because that person actually didn't do it. But we are gonna do it, and we until the day we die, we're gonna be doing certain things. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that more, right? Allah knows all the details and stuff, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows our life plan, right? And that is something that's more that is less difficult to know than of a person who doesn't exist because they died early. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so with this, you understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew everything that you're gonna do. Today, you're attending the webinar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that you're gonna do that, and He mapped out everything to facilitate that. Allah made sure that people who designed or like programmed Zoom, right, were born, and that they had studied what they studied, and then they had met the way that they had met, and they had worked on the projects that they had met, and they had come up with, they had recognized, or they had been given some sort of understanding of what to, where the world is sort of going towards, and what the needs are, and then designing a solution for that particular constraint, or those particular constraints, right? And that was to have the video software, conferencing software, and so on, right? So they sat there and they designed that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made sure that happened so that today we could be sitting here and discussing that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also made sure that the Prophet was born so he could say this hadith right here. And then every narrator from the time the Prophet until today, that person had to live so that I could pass this hadith on to you or just mention it to you, right? So for example, I have a hadith sheikh, right? And we get, when he narrates the hadith to us and he explains it to us, so we get we get connected to his chain, going back to the author of the book, of the hadith book, for example, Imam Bukhari or so on, and then eventually does to the Prophet, right? So there's chains going back from today, from the time of the Prophet until today. In other words, we can trace it back all the way to the Prophet. So every person in that chain would have had to be alive and had to like have to be in the right place at the right time so that they can take the hadith and pass it down to us over here. So all of these things had to come together and had to work in the same way. COVID-19 had to have happened so that we could give you this hadith right here. I hope this is giving you some sort of understanding of how perfect the planning and how complex it is, and why it's so effective for us, or so beneficial for us to align our small T truths with capital T truths, and why we need to constantly try to learn the capital T truths so that we don't have to keep on experimenting and doing trial and error trying to figure out what those capital T truths are. Like if you're standing in the maze and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I get to the other side, right? What if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you that key right here? Use this, get out like this, right? Versus standing here and trying to having to go through trial and error. So this is what I want you to get out of this hadith right here, and like the the idea of how the hadith came to you. So by the way, notice over here, he said Imam Bukhari over here is saying حدثني إسحاق. I don't know why it's not showing, but it is Sahih Bukhari. So he's saying that he was informed, or he was narrated to by Ishaq, his teacher, who was informed by Abdul Razak, his teacher, who was informed by Ma'mar, who was informed by Hammam, who was informed by the Sahabi Abu Hurairah, who was informed by the Prophet. But Imam Bukhari also narrated to somebody, and then that person narrated to somebody else, and that person narrated to somebody else, and that person narrated to somebody else, until, for example, that particular hadith came to the person who had this chain right here, and they put this right here on sunnah.com. So all that stuff had to come until the person who was the source material for sunnah.com. Until that point, the chains had to be there, right? And so if I'm hearing this hadith from my sheikh, then I get a chain going through him all the way back to Imam Bukhari, and then from Imam Bukhari it goes to Ishaq, Abdul Razak, and so on and so all the way there. So everyone in the chain had to be alive. Everyone had to have the circumstances that were there, so that I could get this hadith and I could share it with you. And likewise, you all had to have the right experiences in your life so that you could be on this Zoom thing right now. So this is why it's so important for us to understand that the alignment of our small T truths with the capital T truths is what's going to bring us happiness and contentment, and it is the shortest route out of the path that we need to get through. Okay, neuroplasticity. Neuro, you sort of probably got an idea, something to do with like neurons and brain and stuff like that, right? Plastic is something a little bit more difficult to kind of sort of catch in this word right here. So let me explain it to you by first showing you a picture of a neuron. So neurons, this is how your brain works and so on, right? So there's communication pathways over here. These are the synapses, right? And that's sort of how. In fact, I don't know if you guys have some like background on this, but computers, they're trying to model them a lot more like a human brain, because the way the human brain works, it's fascinating and it's amazing, and so they're trying to replicate that. Even in artificial intelligence, for example, machine learning and so on, they're trying to develop systems and so on so that they can sort of mimic how Allah designed everything, right? So the idea over here, and again, all these things are running on electricity, pretty much. Electric potentials are going to carry the signal from this neuron to the next neuron, to like all the stuff that you guys studied when you guys were studying the nervous system. So this is like the the details of it. And like, for example, your muscle contractions work also based on chemical processes that are run off of electrical impulses. So these electric signals that are coming through, that's what is working. So these synapses is what we're talking about over here, but also we're talking about neurons over here. So you see all these these lines that are going here, sort of like the hair of this neuron, right? All that stuff. So I want you to remember this, because in the next slide I'm going to explain to you how these structures change. You see the network, see like the little or the very thin lines in the back. That's like the combination of all these different neurons in your brain that are kind of sort of working together simultaneously. Storing information, processing information, doing all this stuff simultaneously. It's like there's like big data centers and stuff like that, where for example, where is the internet stored, right? I don't know if you've ever thought about this question. Where is the internet stored? Where is all the information on the internet stored, right? So for example, Google has like a bunch of, or like, you know, internet service providers, like the hosts, right? They have like these data centers where they have like, I don't know if they're, you know, these big giant picobytes and stuff, like these ginormous amounts of data, right? That they store in their data centers and stuff, and it gets really, really hot over there because of all the processing that's going on and all that stuff. And they have multiple, they have what they call redundancy, right? Where you have multiple storages of the same content. So you have like multiple files, multiple copies of the same file, right? So if something goes wrong in one, the other one is picking up the store. So this is how servers also work. So this is like a ginormous servicing server in your own brain, right? So imagine like a company has an internal network. This is like the intranet within a company. And this is where you have like the virtual privacy networks that you can like log into from your home and stuff, and then you can connect to your company's, you know, network or whatever. So imagine like all these computers or all these like, you know, nodes that are connecting together, and that's sort of like how your brain works and stuff, right? And then it communicates all that stuff. So remember this, and let's go to the next thing. And an example I gave about the office and so on. So I got this from like a neuroplasticity for kids. Okay, I wanted to give you like a definition that everyone can understand. So this was a nice website. It gave it to you. It was intended to be like, the audience was intended to be kids. So I hope this makes it a lot easier for you to understand what like brain plasticity is. So what is it? Plasticity is when your brain, your neural pathways, these hair-like things and stuff, they start reorganizing and restructuring. They make new connections. Maybe they'll make a connection with this neuron in the back, right, with the one that's over here. Maybe it wasn't there before, but now it's going to make that connection because of a new experience that you had. Maybe there was like a learning experience that you had. Maybe it's something that you already knew. So for example, there's a lot of stuff that you already knew about neurons, for example, right? Maybe you knew about how the brain works and stuff, you know, a little bit. You knew that there was some electricity involved, you had the spine and all that stuff, right? But maybe you also now in this context learned that there is something called neuroplasticity, and that means that your neurons are sort of restructuring, reorganizing, and like they're optimizing themselves based on the experience that you had, whatever the experience, whether it's like, you know, you just like somebody surprised you and they gave you like, you know, a gift or whatever, or maybe like, you know, you were driving by something and stuff and you saw an accident and like you felt a certain way, right? Or whether you learned something new and stuff. All these things are experiences that you had. So all of these things impact how your restructuring happens, and your brain is constantly doing this, right? And this is a constant, ever developing, ever improving brain, because it needs to adapt. You need to keep adapting to optimize your functioning in your environment, in your surroundings. So that's what it means. Plasticity or neuroplasticity describes how experiences reorganize neural pathways in the brain. Long-lasting functional changes in the brain occur when we learn new things or memorize new information. These changes in neural connections are what we call neuroplasticity, right? Sometimes we think that older people, you know, are very stubborn and stuff or whatever, and they can be, right? But because they're not sort of accepting that their brain is very plastic, they sort of choose to just sort of stick to whatever they've adapted to, right? And that's it. And not everything is bad, because, you know, some things you've pretty much tried and tested so many times, sort of like, okay, there is no other way. Anything is not going to change that, right? So you've accepted some things and stuff, which is okay. But some things that should not be accepted because they're flexible, right? Then you shouldn't accept them. So keep this in mind, that your brain is very flexible, adaptable. It can keep changing and adjusting based on your environment. So your environment plays a huge role. During COVID-19, if you were still stuck in yesterday's mindset of, you know, like going back to everything being normal and stuff, COVID-19 not being there, and we're just kind of interacting together like we used to before and stuff, kind of carefree, careless and stuff. You know, we were hugging each other, we were like, you know, shaking hands and stuff. We didn't really care, you know, if a person like sort of sneezed on us and stuff, we sort of like brushed it off, wiped it off or whatever. We're done, right? That's how we were living life, very carefree, right? But then sort of our new experiences happened, and so we had to confront it. But a lot of us may not have accepted that. A lot of us probably were still hoping that things are going to go back to normal. And when they didn't go back to normal, we started getting, you know, overwhelmed and frustrated because we didn't have a backup plan, right? We didn't know what to do in this context. It was a new, we weren't ready to kind of like move forward. So this right here, something that we can understand. Neuroplasticity is to help you understand that in any situation you might find yourself, always be very flexible, very dynamic. If you come across a situation that you haven't come across before, okay, this is part of life. You tell yourself, okay, how do I use whatever tools that I have whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has opened for me, right? How do I use that stuff to navigate the new experience that I'm going through? So this is a challenge. It's a good challenge because you're trying to, and remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha, that no soul is burdened beyond whatever it can bear. So whatever you're going through is necessarily something that you can get through. And if you don't accept that, then you're gonna sit back and just gonna get overwhelmed and give up, right? But once you accept this reality, capital T truth, right, that everything that you go through is something that you can get through, right? It's not something that you're gonna, like, your life is gonna be just turned off or whatever. Everything that you're presented is because Allah intended it that way. He wanted you to go through that, but He also made sure that you had everything that you needed to navigate that. So for me, in the very beginning, for example, with this mindset, it helped me during the first few days of COVID-19 shutdown, right? And even before that, I was like, okay, this is great because, you know, it's a new thing that I haven't gone through before. It's a challenge. Okay, let me start coming up with, like, new ways to adapt to it, right? For me, it was this experience. And one of the first things that, you know, happened was I was exposed to some seminar or webinars where they started talking about exactly the same thing. They said, okay, and this, like, you know, one of them was all these organizations and businesses that they came on this webinar, right? Leaders of these organizations, and, you know, and companies and so on. They came to this webinar, and the presenters started telling them, okay, you're here, lockdown is happening, you're worried about your money, you're worried about all these things, you're worried about the, you know, major changes you might have to take and stuff. You don't know how long this is gonna last. No problem. Adapt yourself to it. Change. What is it that you're gonna need to focus on the most? What are your priorities? Start kind of like focusing on those things right there. When you accept that, then you can navigate accordingly. If there is something that is not going to be that's not like first priority, then sort of put it aside, right? Optimize your budget based on the new situation that you're in, which is that, okay, now we're probably not going to have to worry about our, you know, fuel expenses. Okay, so let me not worry about that as much. Let me take that money and allocate it to some other thing, sort of like readjust myself. And if you can accept that your life is going to be constant adjustment of things like this, then you're going to live a happy life. Just understand that life is always about changes and stuff. There are some things that are going to sort of become, like, you know, normative, but it doesn't mean that that's how life is, right? That it doesn't mean that that's perfect, everything is good to go. Your goal in life is not to get everything sort of like settled down, everything's happy and fine and dandy and stuff like that. No, that's not what your goal is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't expect that from you either, right? The idea for you is to understand that everything is constantly changing, but for you to be able to make the most out of that situation that you're in, based on the tools Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, so that you're competent in terms of navigating those situations and experiences. So that's your, I shouldn't say every, that should be ever, I don't know where the Y came from. So it's ever adapting brain, right? Accept that reality, that it's always changing, and you're necessarily given everything that you need to navigate it. And no matter what situation you come across, you're going to be content and you're going to be happy and you're never going to be frustrated. Okay, so what is the plastic brain? I want you to take a second to just kind of skim through all this stuff if you want. Here, the sources over here too, if you want to go back and look through it. I copied and pasted all this, by the way, so you don't have to actually read all this stuff. You can go back to that thing and just get it. But the main things I want you to understand is your experiences have a lot of impact. And I'm using the word experience in a broad sense. So I'm talking about everything. So for example, psychoactive drugs can impact your brain structure, right? And it can mess things up. If you're addicted to some things, then your brain chemistry and your brain structure, actually the physical structure, can change, right? There are certain parts of the brain, for example, for taxi drivers, they did a study where I believe it was like London cabbie drivers, they needed to know how to navigate situations and so on. So for them, the study showed that there were certain parts of their brains were a lot bigger compared to other people, right? And these are the spatial thinking parts of the brain. And so that became bigger because they had to sort of understand in like a 3D mind view, right? A mental view of the layout of the city. So they had to know where the roads are and stuff, where they look, how far they are and stuff. They had to have sort of like a virtual map in their head in like a 3D sense. right? So this is spatial thinking. And then this is, dentists also need to know this if you want to be a dentist. That's one of the things they're going to ask you on the test, on the DAT. So this idea of spatial thinking. So in this case, your brain structure can actually change based on your experiences, based on things that you do more compared to other things that you might do less frequently and so on. But also psychoactive drugs can have the similar impact. Remember I said muscle movement is based on chemical reactions or chemical processes, right? But they're also connected to the stimulation from your neurons and so on, right? And so understanding that helps you understand that psychoactive drugs, these chemicals, can interfere with that, and then it can necessarily reorganize your structure, right? Reorganize the structure of your brain and so on. So they can actually mess things up a little bit. So for example, a person who's addicted to drugs, right, or anything else that they're addicted to, there's a lot of things that people are addicted to nowadays. Whatever you're addicted to, your brain sort of adapts to that, right? And then when you cut off of that, you start getting withdrawal symptoms. I recently had a case where there was a person who was addicted to marijuana. This like the high school teenager, and this person, they were into all the fad of like vaping and so on. So they got really into it. They got like into more things and stuff and so on. So when they got cut off because their parents found out and they sort of cut them off from that supply of like marijuana, they started having withdrawal symptoms, and the withdrawal symptoms were so severe that they started having sort of like they were almost as if they were possessed, right? They were shaking constantly, like one or two hands or whatever, like the legs would kind of just keep shaking and stuff. This person couldn't focus. This person like was talking strange or whatever. So it really looked like this person is possessed, right? And all it was this: they were having withdrawal symptoms, right? Allah, I mean, of course, other things could have happened, but this was something that became apparent, and so like this person was taken to their doctor, and they had to be on medication and so on, because if your brain sort of got used to a certain way of like the environment, then you have withdrawal symptoms if you don't get that same stimulus. So your brain sort of needs time to readjust itself in the absence of that stimulant, whatever that stimulant might be, like with drugs or whatever. So once the brain sort of like comes back to its normal shape or whatever, then and I'm going to say normal meaning like what was before you started doing drug abuse or substance abuse or whatever it was and stuff, right? So before those addictions, whatever your brain was, it needs that time to sort of come back to that baseline level and stuff, right? And so understand that all of these things can impact how your brain works. Your food, for example, your dietary factors, your food can impact it. Genetics can also have an impact and stuff, right? Diseases can have an impact and stuff. You're like, for example, if you work out a lot, then there are certain things in your brain that can kind of get optimized and so on, right? So if you don't do that, then there's other things that happen. You get more depressed and stuff like that sometimes. But if you work out, you have this like this like healthy lifestyle and so on, then it necessarily impacts your life and so on. So all of these things constantly impact who you are and how you navigate any situation that you come across. So with that, takeaways. We talked about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving his guidance, sort of like the solution manual for life. He mapped out the maze and he gave you the solution manual. Us, our minds constantly adapt and change based on our experiences, but because of that, we need to make sure that we constantly try to realign our small t truths, whatever we perceive reality to be like, with the capital T truths, what reality is actually like. When we do that, we live a more content and happy life. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also always is not going to give you anything beyond what you can bear. Whatever it is that whatever you can do, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to make more than that come your way. You're not going to be overwhelmed. Whatever you have, in terms of your tests and experiences in your environments, whatever the circumstances you might be in, is necessarily something that you are capable of doing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew exactly what he was doing when he gave you those conditions. It was a test. Here's the solution manual. Use these tools, navigate this test, and get to a higher level in Jannah, essentially. That's what realigning our small T truths to capital T truths is going to do in your life. It's going to make you content, it's going to make you happy, and it's going to make you adept, like with it, so ADEPTA, adept at navigating any situation that you come across. You're not going to be annoyed, you're not going to be frustrated anymore, you're going to live a happy life. You're going to come across challenges, and you're going to treat them as challenges, and you're going to be happy. Like last time I mentioned that there's, the struggle sort of have like a negative connotation. But when you use the word challenge, it has a more of a positive connotation. So if you consider it, in a negative sense, all these things that constantly keep changing, and you have to keep adjusting, and so on and so on and so on, right? And you get frustrated because your small T truths that you've sort of adopted as the capital T truths are not actually capital T truths, then you're going to keep getting frustrated and annoyed and stuff, and that's going to be a heavy thing for you to navigate and stuff. So these are some takeaways that I want you to do, or I want you to take away from this, inshallah. And moving forward, I want you to start, here's your homework. Moving forward, I want you to start sort of thinking about what are some things in your life that you've sort of accepted as real, as facts of life, as capital T truths of how the world works, right? But in fact, they may not be, because you don't have any proof that these are actually fixed capital T truths. What are some things that you've sort of adopted as your perception of capital T truths, and you're sort of holding on to them, and you're thinking that this is how the life is supposed to be, this is how the world is supposed to work, right? And you're not letting go of it. What are those truths that you're holding on to and you're not letting go that are actually in conflict with the capital T truths? When you go through trauma therapy, for example, this is one of the things that they're going to help you sort of let go of. The things that you've sort of accepted and sort of adopted, you sort of like bounded yourself by, right? Are they actually things that you should have bounded yourself with, or no? So sort of do your own, I'm not going to say like do your own therapy, but sort of do your own realignment, right? You do some introspection, right? Think about it in yourself. What am I doing? What are my values, or what are the things that I'm holding on to as facts, right? As my theoretical, or as my assumed reality that may actually not be, because I don't have any proof for that. Right? And the more you learn about Islam, the more you constantly keep adapting yourself to align yourself from small T truths to actual capital T truths. So what is it that you guys all have, that we all have, that we're not letting go of, but we have sort of assumed them to be real, to be facts? And how is that then conflicting you in your life affairs? How is that frustrating you? How is that overwhelming you? How is that negatively impacting you from a perspective of contentment, happiness, and all that, right? So what you're doing with this is finding the sources of your frustration and your annoyances and so on. If you find your character is not good, or if you find that other people's characters are not good, if you find these things, understand that the source of it here is the disconnection between reality and your perceived reality. That's it. If you're ever frustrated and annoyed and bothered and like overwhelmed and negative and all that stuff, it's because your capital T truths that you've taken as your small T truths that you've taken as capital T truths are not actually capital T truths, and you're not letting go of that. You're just sort of becoming stubborn on it. So I want you to go home, or I mean, if you're home already, then just sit down, think about that, like do like a really deep introspection from now on, every single day moving forward until the day you die, right? What are things that you've sort of held as truths, but they're not truths? And how is that necessarily impacting you in a negative way from a character perspective, from like, like overwhelming or overall contentment aspect?